Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience of SmithWeekly, including Todd A., Brian H., Jeff S., and Cindy W. On the program today, we have a returning guest back to update. Mr. Jon Gilligan is with us. Jon is the president and CEO of Liberty Gold. The company is focused on advancing its Black Pine oxide gold project in southern Idaho, United States, to feasibility, permitting, and construction. In its most recent pre-feasibility study, the Black Pine project is expected to produce about 183,000 ounces of gold in the first 5 years of production, and an average of about 135,000 ounces of gold over its expected 17-year mine life. Liberty Gold also has a second project, the PEA stage Gold Strike Oxide Gold Project in southern Utah. Liberty Gold is listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange under the symbol LGD and also on the US OTC markets under the symbol LGDTF. Mr. Gilligan, welcome back to SmithWeekly Discussions.
Andrew, thank you very much for inviting me onto the show. Really appreciate it, and great to talk to you again.
Yeah, Jon, it's great to have you back on. There's been quite a few updates at the company and, of course, progress in the market and changes out there since we last spoke. So it's great to have you back. Well, why don't we get right into updates here, Jon? First, the ongoing drill program and bulk sampling work at the Black Pine project. Cover for us where the company is on work, the schedule to complete the program, as well as when we can start to see some of those results come out.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So the plan this year is to essentially do feasibility field work. And that really involves building the pre-feasibility resource model. We're going to put 40,000 meters of drilling into the pre-feas resource. We have 2 drills in the field operating right now. We have another drill arriving literally today. And we anticipate that we'll finish those 40,000 meters sort of early in the fourth quarter of this year. And what we're targeting is, when you drill out a large ore body as the Black Pine, a lot of the resource classification is geometric. So you have a drill spacing of 50 meters or 30 meters for whatever class it is in particular. But quite often when you can't get a platform in the right place, the drill or orientation doesn't quite make the 50 meters, and you get kind of patches in the resource model that are inferred rather than indicated. So we've gone in and we've targeted some very specific holes to infill those particular gaps, and also chase two particular areas where we've seen high-grade mineralization sort of disappear, if you like, into the resource shell that constrains the resource. So we anticipate that we would drill out that particular part, and then the resource shell would correspondingly push back. So we've got a strong push to get a feasibility resource model completed by the end of the year. And also the other field works are associated with the metallurgical program. We're doing bulk samples, so that's a sort of 25 to 30 ton sample. We'll be taking 7 of those. And those samples will go to the lab for sort of large scale column testing. That'll finish the feasibility metallurgical work. We'll be doing hydrological work starting probably in August, I think is the schedule, once we receive the okay from the authorities. And that will be monitoring wells, piezometer wells, and some model building. And then the final piece of the field work this year is going to be site civil investigation. And that involves a little bit of geotechnical pits and some auger work, particularly directly underlying the site of the heap leach, where we're doing sort of soil compression tests, understanding the soil structure directly below the heap, so we can design the heap appropriately from the point of view of geotechnical stability. All of that comes to the end of this year, where we are targeting completion of the resource model, completion of fees met, completion of fees geotech, and completion of fees hydro. So that's all of the sort of the supporting disciplines that then feed in the start of next year to feasibility level mine planning, and then that leads into engineering design, and then ultimately the end of the feasibility study targeting sort of late Q3, early Q4 next year.
Jon, thank you for going through that. Lots of work here. Maybe to some out there, it's a little bit of boring work, but there's a lot of good stuff that can come of this. So it looks like there'll be a lot of news flowing out through the rest of the year from the company on various areas that are very key to the project. Jon, just one point of clarification, Q3 2026 for the feasibility study coming out. Any potential plans to follow up on anything next year? Will there be further program on site, further drilling, anything else that you guys would expect? I mean, I know it's early to say based on some of the results that are yet to come, but any expected work into 2026 as far as on-site drilling and anything else that you think you guys might add between now and the release of that feasibility study?
I think in my mind, we'll drill out to get to a feasibility resource model. We'll lock in that model at the end of this year, and that model will ultimately drive the results for feasibility. But of course, as you rightly point out, Andrew, that's just a snapshot in time and doesn't reflect the 100% of what we believe is actually in the deposit. We've sort of drilled, if you want to think of it that way, the core of the onion. We have permits for the next ring of the onion out. We did a bit of drilling last year. We did 20,000 meters of drilling last year in some of those specific targets in that second onion ring. And I think, in my mind, we'll go back into the field next year with a few thousand meters with some sort of surgical drilling just to sort of test the water, if you like, on this peripheral, the next onion ring out. Of course, we've also got another onion ring out around that, which at this time is unpermitted from an exploration point of view. And I think we need to make a decision either next year or perhaps the year after to start a permitting process for that second onion ring, so that we open up, that would open up another 30 square kilometers of exploration ground that is going to get drilled longer term. But we need to be cautious with our treasury. The focus here is very clear. The focus is get the deposit through permitting so that we get a positive permit decision in late 27 that allows us to make a construction decision and build this thing. And so our treasury is very focused on that. But we're also conscious that, that shareholders want to see, where's this thing going? What's the upside? And we've been pretty clear in the market. We have a just under 5 million ounce resource right now. We see that growing incrementally over time. I think we're going to see an incremental growth in the feasibility resource model, perhaps up to 10%. That's kind of my target. In my mind, that's where I think we'd like to get to in terms of a resource growth, and that should translate to some increase in reserves as well. We've talked about a 5 to 8 million ounce system, and I think that's kind of where we see it. If you want to put some rose-tinted spectacles on, there's probably upside to a 10 million ounce entire gold system on this site. That's going to take a lot longer, and ultimately will get drilled out during the operating life of the mine.
Jon, that covers a little bit more what I wanted to get into here in a moment. We'll talk about that, but the potential of this project that's yet to be tested. Good to see you guys would be pursuing some of those things as we wait along here and finish up some of this stuff on permitting, and it still takes a bit of time here and can be boring for the market. You guys will be doing other things as well. So you talked a little bit about the expansion of the resources expected. Jon, anything else you can tell us as to maybe some of those focus areas with you leading Liberty Gold here, some of those focus areas that you would expect to change between the pre-feasibility study and the feasibility study, maybe some areas you think the project will change? We talked about, obviously, resources are going to change, but any other areas that you think we should maybe take a look or consider that could change between pre-feas and now the feasibility study?
Yeah, look, so that great question, Andrew. I think sort of overarching, classically in the industry, when we come out with a PEA as an industry, the PEA looks very flashy and got great grades and nice economics. Quite often one does that sort of trying to show the best side of a project. When you get to a PFS, it's not uncommon that the PFS isn't quite as good as the PEA because you've had to put a dose of realism perhaps into what you engineer. And of course, that's the purpose of a PFS. And then when you get to FS, you have to sharpen your pencil a bit more, and perhaps things aren't quite as good as a PFS. And so you see value loss classically from the first study to the one you actually build. I think we have an opportunity here to go the other way. I'm in big discussions with our team about, well, what do we need to do to come out with a feasibility study that's better than our pre-feas? And I think we've got some real opportunities in this arena. The first one I mentioned, I think we're going to see some resource growth. I think we're going to see some better grade material nearer surface, particularly in the Rangefront West area. And I think that that higher grade, perhaps slightly bigger resource in Rangefront, I think that has the possibility to resequence the mining from the sequence that we had at pre-feasibility, which was we mined the discovery pit. That's the main pit up on the hill. And then at the end of the mine life, we mine the Rangefront, which is sort of down the hill, right beside the heap. From an operating point of view, you'd rather mine the deposit closer to the heap because it's shorter haulage. It's also lower down, so less susceptible to any issues from winter, and also less construction in terms of haul roads and access. So I think we have the opportunity, depending on how the results go in the drilling, to potentially resequence the mine, bring Rangefront further up in the production schedule. The advantage of that is that Rangefront is the best recovering material from a metallurgical perspective that we have on the mine. It's 10% on average better than all of the other ores in terms of recovery. And putting that on the heap in the early years of the mine, I think is a very nice risk mitigation road forward. So I'm kind of interested in that as a potential outcome. The second piece I would highlight is that we've just finished doing a sonic drill program on the old heap, the legacy heap from the Pegasus mining in the 90s. We're starting to see assays come in on that. I would say that some of those are looking quite interesting. Once we have all of the assays in on that heap, we will obviously do a model. The intention is that heap, and there's 30 million metric tons in that heap, and it's right beside the new heap, or the design for the new heap. If we can demonstrate that that is a resource and that we can leach material out of that previously leached ore, then that would be very easy to rehandle onto our new heap in the early mine life. And it would be, very low cost ore to use either as crush it and use it as overliner. So that's the material that goes directly on top of the plastic, the impermeable HDPE liner, and acts as a cushion for when you dump ore on top of the heap. You dump it on a sort of a cushion of this crushed material. So that would save us significant money in up front, instead of having to find that material, crush it, and then bring it to the heap. So and we will get gold recovery from it. So I think that's going to be a very interesting upside opportunity. I think we're going to see some option from some tweaking of the recovery models once we run the bulk samples. I think that's going to be a very interesting opportunity. And I think the biggest opportunity we face is at pre-feasibility, we ran various production rate scenarios. So 35,000 tons a day feed to the heap, 50,000 tons a day, and 65. We went with 50,000 tons a day because at pre-feas level, it was kind of a sweet spot. You could see that the mine plan was it sort of settled out, if you like, in terms of material movements and consistent ore availability. However, that resulted in putting just under 100 million tons in and out of stockpiles. As we overproduce ore, we have to stockpile it because you've got a fixed capacity onto the heap. And at $1.30 a ton rehandle cost, that's a significant $150 million of operating cost. If we go to the higher production rate, 65 or perhaps even 70, we reduce some of that handling. We don't have to increase the material movement in the heap, so same fleet, same heap. We just have to put a bit more capital into the pumps, the pumping system, and the ADR, the processing plant. But it's very, very high value capital in the sense that it's a small amount of money for a significant increase in production. And I think we will definitely engineer that case at fees. And I think that's the case that's got the best chance of getting us to the magic 200,000 ounces a year for those first 5 years. So that, I think, is going to be where we'd like to take the feasibility study.
John, that's lots of good stuff. So yeah, I think we're going to see more progress on this, and that's very good information as far as how you're looking at some of those improvement areas. One of the other areas that I think is obviously going to be key as you guys continue to work some of the progress here and tests on met work. What do you think is going to happen with respect to recoveries? We have initial information so far. You guys have already done some testing work, but what do you see could happen with recoveries, John, based on your expertise and experience? What do you think will happen with recoveries between what we have now versus what you guys would expect under a production scenario?
We've deliberately, in most aspects of the pre-feasibility study, we've been reasonably conservative, I think is probably the best definition. We've not pushed the envelope. We've not wanted to do that. And that, in many cases, I think, has given us the opportunity I described in the last question. Can we sharpen our pencil a bit on that one and see a bit of improvement going into fees and ultimately into operations? We have a very strong metallurgical model. We've done a lot of work in terms of understanding different ore types, the distribution in across the deposit, assigning specific recoveries to specific rock units within a given metallurgical ore type. And I think the sample program that we're doing this year, which, as I mentioned, is 7 bulks, 20 to 30 ton bulk samples, and we're going to leach those in 4-foot diameter columns, 24 feet high. And that is sort of the proof of, yes, you can leach this in at run of mine size. What does run of mine size mean for this deposit? Somewhere between 80% of the material having a grain size less than sort of 8 to 6 inches, in that kind of size. So 10%, 20% higher than that, 80% less than a sort of 6 to 8 inch grain size. And that's what you would typically do if you didn't have any prior production information. But of course, in our case, we have the previous mine. There's the 30 million ton legacy heap that I told you about. We have the production data from that. That was a run of mine heap. So the same method that we're going to use: drill, blast, load, haul onto a truck, and then just dump that on the heap. No crushing, no agglomeration, no conveyors, no stackers. A very simple, cheap, and effective process. I think we're going to see that bulk sample work together with the drilling on that legacy heap that I mentioned earlier. That drilling will allow us to recalculate what the actual final recovery, overall recovery on the heap was. And that'll give us, I think, a really important data point to allow us to calibrate our own internal models. And I see us maintaining some conservative view in recovery. You don't want to overcook recovery, but I think we're going to see a modest improvement across the board in that number going into feasibility. You may not be able to see that in the numbers. It'll be modest, but it'll be there, and it'll be our view, particularly around the better recovering ore types, the Geomet 1, for those who've had the opportunity to read section 13 of the PFS. That's the good stuff, for the sake of argument. It's the cyanide solubility above 65%, nice, clean, well recovering material. And I think that stuff, particularly the higher grade material, I think we're probably undercooking a little bit what we can get out of that, and we'll dial a little bit of that back in at fees.
That's a good area. We'll be looking forward to seeing some updates on that. And I like the cooking analogy as you hit there. So that's very good information. And the project is quite simple, and that's going to be also an important thing. You guys have set this up as a very simple project, reduces a lot of the risks out there with complex projects, so that's good as well. I want to shift over just for a moment to the permitting work that is ongoing and, of course, environmental impact statement preparation. How are things coming along with that side of things?
We hired what I like to refer to as a permitting Jedi, a guy called Matt Zietlow, basically a year ago now. I knew Matt from my time at Marigold when I was with Silver Standard, as it then was, when we purchased Marigold out of the Barrick Gold Corp JV. And Matt sort of came along with Marigold. He left, I think, about a year later and went off to have a stellar career with Waterton and then with Kerr. And I fished him out of Wharf a year ago because he was up for the challenge of getting involved in permitting and ultimately building a new mine in the US. Matt has done a tremendous job sort of corralling the troops and bringing in that deep sort of US permitting, NEPA permitting skill set. We sort of front end loaded that in many ways because we had done a sort of a conceptual plan of operations about 6 months before Matt arrived. We'd submitted that. So we'd started engaging the authorities. Matt came on board and went right into full community, social, and authorities engagement. We submitted our draft mine plan of operation in January this year. And that is, think of that, your listeners should think of that as a pre-feasibility study that's kind of reformatted a bit to emphasize some of the impacts and some of the mitigations. But essentially, it's what are you going to do as you're going to dig a pit here, I'm going to build this here, I'm going to use this much power, this much water, and it sort of lays out in a fairly simplified way exactly what the project is. That is under review right now by the relevant agencies. We have the lead is the forest, U.S. Forest Service, and because the deposit, the Black Pine deposit, gold deposit, is largely about 95% on U.S. Forest Service land. The infrastructure that we're going to build, that's the heap, the truck shop, and the sort of admin buildings, those are on BLM land. So the BLM is also involved in the process. So we've got sort of principal lead the forest, we've got a co-lead the BLM, and then we've got the cooperating agencies, the various state agencies, Idaho Department of Lands, Fisheries and Wildlife, and particularly Environmental Quality are all part of this permitting team. And Matt was instructive, I think, in ultimately negotiating and signing cooperation MOUs between all parties. So we have an MOU that lays out our relationship to permit this mine with the forest. We have one with the BLM. And then there's a three-way between the BLM, the forest, and the state agencies, which lays out how they're going to cooperate in permitting this thing. And I think that was a real win for us because it clearly laid out the ground rules where you've got multiple players. They're not all looking at the same thing, but to some extent, there is overlap in what they're required to opine on. And we agreed in that discussion to follow the US Forest Service process to permit this thing. So that was a huge contribution. And we have a permanent, full-time US Forest project lead, permitting project lead for Black Pine. And the lead is sort of corralling the troops, if you like, right across all of the agencies to make sure that we meet the time frame that we've committed to. And we've signed off with the government, on the federal government, on a time frame. And that's the time frame that we've been out there sort of telling the market, which is leading us to expect a draft decision notice, or a record of decision, as it's sometimes called, in Q4 2027. The next key waypoint, I mentioned earlier that we've submitted the draft mine plan of operations. That goes through a completeness review. And we're expecting, we've had one round of feedback from the agencies. We've reworked a draft, and we're now expecting a second round of comments. We're anticipating that we would get to a completeness statement sometime this quarter. I think that would be a fantastic outcome. And then that would lead us to what is called a notice of intent, which is the federal registration in Washington of the project. And that for the forest is a 30-day process. And I think that you're probably going to ask about the current administration's changes and its impact on that process. I think one of the impacts that we're going to see is some improvement in the timing of the Washington, the DC based processes in terms of pushing it through the administrative piece in Washington faster than perhaps it has done in the past. But we're expecting that notice of intent in the fourth quarter. And at that point, we are 2 years, 24 months from our permit decision or our notice decision.
Jon, that's excellent. And yes, I was going to talk a little bit about those changes on the regulatory front.
Yeah, please do.
So far, of course, there's been a little hot air out there, and we don't know how much traction is actually going to hit the road here. But with respect to the 2-year time frame, are you getting indications from some of your consultants out there, some of the group, as far as actual material increases, improvement, I should say, in review and processing times from a federal standpoint? Because my understanding generally is the federal decisions are the key to the state decisions to some extent. That has an impact. And then also with that and some of those changes, do you see that there would be more urgency to get applications completed and submitted ASAP, or how are you looking at that?
Look, that's a really good question. One is tempted to be sort of over optimistic, I think, at what's going on, and I tend to be a little cautious here. But I think we also need to be realistic. Let me phrase this in a couple of ways. I think it is very, very clear, the signal from the administration in terms of improving, in terms of time at the very least, a process that I think has become a lot longer than perhaps one originally would have wished. So the administration wants to move things faster, and it is trying very hard by tone and by some regulation change to encourage the agencies to adopt that. So huge positive tone coming from the administration, and that cannot help but have a positive effect overall in terms of getting projects through the process. None of the underlying environmental laws or environmental compliances have really changed. So it's important to note that. The current administration hasn't, for example, said, okay, you don't have to comply with water quality, or you don't have to comply with air quality, or any kind of a compliance. Those are all in place. You have to do exactly the same work, demonstrate to exactly the same level of technical ability, and are subject to the same technical review to prove that you've demonstrated the impact and that you've got whatever mitigation is required and in place in your plan. So none of that's changed. The main reaction in the medium to long term is going to be a more efficient bureaucratic process, I think, to get permits through in a more efficient way. What that's done for us particularly, it's changed the risk profile on what we've told the market and what we've agreed with the government. That is this 2-year process from NOI to record of decision, and that record of decision in Q4. And I don't want to put numbers on it, but that risk, there was a risk profile to that it could be delayed, it could be pushed out. I think that risk profile has now significantly reduced as a result of the tone set by the new administration. They want to get these things done. And in a case like Black Pine, which has an extremely benign environmental impact, we really don't have many of the sort of hot button items that some other projects have that require detailed analysis, that sort of create environmental pushback from people who want to protect those types of things. For example, surface waterways, and obviously aquatic species are a big deal, and people rightly have a view about wanting to protect those. Projects that don't have that, become almost, it's not worth the effort because there's really nothing from a hot button item to have a go at. And we sit, I think, quite nicely in that brownfield site, no surface waters, no threatened and endangered species, previously disturbed, low environmental footprint, no tailings dam, no acid mine drainage potential, ARD potential from the waste dumps, and so on and so on. And so when you look at Black Pine as a project, it really is quite a benign project from many of those difficult items. So, I think we were always going to be relatively easier than other projects. And I think what's happened now is that risk profile's improved, if you like, with the new administration. Can we get it quicker? I'm on record of saying maybe a quarter. Maybe we can bring it forward a quarter. I'd love to think it was more. It's not inconceivable that it's more, but I'm not prepared to make that call right now. I think we need to wait. And the reason for that, what happens in the very short term when the administration makes major changes, and it's recently, you may be aware, it's recently issued some sort of revised NEPA instructions to the agencies. And what it's done is it's put quite a bit of the onus on the NEPA process back on the agency to decide what does it think is important in the actual process, what is relevant, what isn't relevant to a given asset, and then allow them, if you like, to streamline that process. Makes perfect sense, and we're very supportive of that. In the very short term, that creates a pause while the agency kind of figures it out. And of course, if you're in that process at that time, you're subject to that pause, while reasonably the agencies will crank it. Okay, we knew what the ground rules were and we were following that. Now they've changed. We need to figure it out. So we are working, and Matt is working hand in hand with particularly the Forest Service to say, well, what's really important at Black Pine? Let's focus on the important pieces. The ones that are less important, now you have agency to say, well, we don't need to spend so much time on that. We can refocus. So I think that's what's going to happen. The permitting process in the US is going to gradually sharpen. It'll take a little while, but it's going to get to where, I think 2 years is very doable and perhaps even better.
Certainly this project has the potential to get permits much easier from the standpoint, and potentially faster from the standpoint that it is brownfield. You guys don't have a lot of risks out there. It's really in a great location. It's one of the best located projects that's queued for potential development in the U.S. As you know, there's big projects throughout the U.S. in different areas that have been held up for many, many years that have a lot more problems associated with them. And those folks will need to make their own decisions and try to move those projects forward while there's a regulatory environment that may be amenable to actually getting the permits granted on those projects. And we know that they're acting quickly to try to do that. Why we have it. And then the other side of it is this administration is still trying to sort out and clean the desk and the table, and those changes have to flow through all these agencies. And there's this push and pull, whether you're talking about the headquarters or regional headquarters or local ranger district level. So you have so many different tiers to fall down through, and then you have that push and pull of different staff changes and all that stuff. So it takes a while to filter down and get the policy straight. And then, of course, some of the changes at the bigger, EPA level, and definitely the next couple of years will be interesting, but we should hopefully start to see some good clarity. And this project has one of those fast track potentials just because it's such a simple, low risk project, brownfields and all those things that you highlighted. So very good on that front, and looking forward to seeing how you guys progress on this side of things. Getting that milestone is going to be huge for the company. Getting past this hurdle going to be a very big value driver for the company as well.
Once we get our NOI and we're in that kind of 24 months to draft permits, I think at that point, we're here to stay, and it's all going to happen. And we see relatively little risk getting there. We have to get there, but in the next 90 days, looking forward into the quarter, I think we'll see some significant movement in this area. And I think those who have a view that permitting is risky and you never really know. I understand that view. I personally believe the risk in permitting in the US is really not whether you will or won't get a permit. I mean, some projects do have that risk, but I think the much more logical risk is a timing risk. Am I going to get it when I thought, or is it going to be plus 6 months or plus 2 years? I think that's the risk here. It's not a can I or can't I permit it, and particularly as you mentioned, for a black pine that's a relatively benign project. It's a question of when that this is going to happen. We are going to get a permit here. It's previously been mined. It's previously been permitted. There in principle is no reason why we should not be able to get a permit for this thing. The risk is timing, and I think once we're in the NOI, a lot of that risk, in my view, comes off.
And I think that's one of the key things for sure. And looking forward to seeing you guys move this forward. And it's an interesting one because the risk is on, regulatory changes. It's difficult to be able to fit these in properly. You get these windows of opportunity, which I do think in the United States, you do have this window of opportunity.
Agreed.
Then you look at comparable jurisdictions and even uncomparable jurisdictions and the timing to get a project permitted and off and running. It really is an efficiency thing. And given the sophistication, I suppose, if I can say that, John, I'm not sure if the right word to use, but you would expect that these permitting processes could be cleaner. They could be more straightforward, not from the standpoint of quality. We're not changing any quality or
No.
specifications. It's really just a matter of efficient department processing and people actually doing work. And that is, I think, where it kind of lies. And then also the push and pull, the interests out there, whether you're maybe a bad acting NGO that wishes to hold things up and you can influence these agencies. We've definitely seen that as well, speaking of the US. So it's an interesting one as well. But one good thing here, doing it all right from the company's side and also having a project such as Black Pine puts a
Yeah.
significant favor in your guys' hands. So
Yeah, Andrew, perhaps I could add a short comment on that in terms of doing it right. Many of your readers will be aware, talking about changes from the administration. The administration, sort of early on in the game, as you know, had a sort of a view about DEI. There was an executive order that sort of reframed, if you like, the DEI requirements and the environmental justice requirements for an environmental study. And the agencies obviously are responding to that. And what we've chosen to do is we've chosen to do those studies in the way that one previously would have done them, and include something along those lines as an appendix or an adjunct document, so that should there be any issues in terms of someone having an objection to that we've done that work and we can demonstrate if we need to. It just won't form part of the sort of the official body because it's no longer required. So we have to comply with that. But I think we see some value in doing in largely completing that work as we would have done and having it as a sort of in the back drawer, if you like, available should we need it. So we're trying to risk mitigate a little here so that we reduce our exposure post approval.
it's a good way to go about it, John. So I appreciate that. And also appreciate you guys being very conservative here and under promise, over deliver.
Right. I
Approach to
like
things.
that. I prefer that to the other way.
Very, very good. I want to move to capital structure here and balance sheet for a moment. Where
Yep.
are we sitting with cash on hand? You guys had a very successful bought deal a few months ago, but talk about where that cash balance carries as far as what you would expect on time frame on that cash balance, and then also cover for us the current shares outstanding, and then remind the audience as well of the key shareholders on the roster.
Thank you. Yeah, look, we Canaccord led a bought deal, as you know, and we raised 23 million Canadian in the early part of this year, and we had some new institutions, some new individuals into the stock. We had some older investors who had been in the stock and left, and they came back in again. And then we had some current investors who sort of doubled down, if you like, and got in at this point. It's interesting. In my conversations with investors, the company's in a different space than it was 3-4 years ago. We were definitely a exploration, discovery, drill play, and the opportunity here was drill results and bigger and higher grade, and the opportunity now, of course, is this is going to be a mine, and And when you look at the famous Lassonde curve, and there's lots of debate whether that's a real curve or not, I think when you look at share price appreciation from a developer to a producer, there's a very compelling story there. It's quite a different story to the exploration story, but it's a pretty compelling story. And I think it's an investment opportunity that needs a bit of patience. It doesn't get fed in the same way that the exploration sort of upside gets fed, but there's sort of patient, quiet, long-term value build opportunity here, and I'm starting to have conversations with individuals who are starting to recognize that and specifically allocate sections of their portfolio to precisely this type of opportunity, with a sort of sticker saying, "Just hold this. Just hold it. Doesn't matter. Just hold it. It's going to pay off." And so, I think we're starting to see some new investors pick the stock up. We're starting to see the recognition that, these guys are building a team to do this. We're starting to see a bit of confidence just starting to build in terms of the direction of the company, the simplicity of the story. So I'm really pleased at that. And we were delighted that those investors came in early this year. We are fully funded to the end of this year and into early next year. So we'll get through all of that work program I described. We'll get into mine planning, feasibility level mine planning, and we're thinking about how do we continue funding this company through to the end of feasibility and sort of a little way beyond that. So that's going to require a bit of thought, and that's really my main focus right at the moment. What are the opportunities for us? How can we ensure that the company's funded all the way through to the end of fees? That's a key focus of mine right now. We have lots of options. We have interest from a variety of different sources that we're talking at the moment. Obviously, we have conversations ongoing. And so, watch this space. I think there's going to be some interesting opportunity here for us coming forward. So we've got money in the bank till the end of the year. We are looking at opportunities next year. We do have, you may recall, we sold our Turkish assets last year. We had $3.7 million into revenue, into the treasury from that last year. We'll have 2.4 in this year, and then 2.6 in next year. That's in October. We also have warrants coming due next year in April, and then in 27 in April. And those warrants, they're 45-cent warrants. So, I'm very focused on reflecting our value in our share price such that those warrants become in the money. And that will give us, I think, next year, 5 million into treasury. And the year after, if we make 45 cents, or rather when we make 45 cents, that's another 8 million into treasury. So we've got sources of funding coming in. I think we've got a great opportunity to get ourselves with a really solid feasibility study by the end of the year. With that in hand, Andrew, I think if I'm true to my predictions and we've got a better economic outcome in that feasibility compared to PFS, with the gold price anything like it is now, we will have a very, very solid project. And then taking that to seek project finance in a variety of different mechanisms, I think, I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it will be relatively straightforward to take that through and get construction finance on it. And then, we're off to the races at that point.
Pretty good status here. You guys have a little bit of cash flowing in from the sale of non-core assets over the years, and also the runway we do have presently. Of course, things can change as the market conditions change. Plus, the company's results could change as well, to where there might be a need to do financing earlier or later. Just on staffing changes since we last spoke. Of course, our mutual friend Cal Everett retired, and the company appointed Greg Etter as the chair at the AGM recently. Talk a little bit about what Greg brings to the table for the company, as well as any other staffing comments you want to add for a development operational team.
Sure. Well, maybe I can first start by sort of publicly thanking Cal. Cal's really is the founder of Liberty. I mean, Cal joined, I think, in 2015, 2014, and it was Cal with Moira Smith, who identified and ultimately purchased Black Pine, which was a brilliant piece of geologic detective work by Moira Smith. And Cal's the inveterate deals guy. He purchased that asset for, I think, $800,000 and 300,000 shares at the time. And that's, at that point there was no resource on it, and we know it's a 5 to 10 million ounce system. So I mean that's extraordinary. That's an extraordinary story. And Cal has kind of navigated and cajoled the company through difficult times. He's been able to sell assets in Turkey to fund the treasury in a non-dilutive way. And Cal's done an extraordinary job building this company, and I take my hat off to him. He's quite a character for those who know him. Brilliant market insights, and it's a real privilege to sort of take the chair from a gentleman such as Cal. And I wouldn't say he's handed it to me on a plate, but crikey, it's impressive stuff. So I want to publicly thank Cal for his incredible efforts and insight. The board changes. Rob Peace was the prior chair. Rob has been on the board for a long time and is a very long time supporter of the company and the team. I think he felt it was a good opportunity to bring a new person into the chair. Greg was a VP of corporate affairs at Kinross. I think has got a broader kind of market mining view. And I think that's a good reflection of where the company's coming out of this sort of exploration discovery piece and moving into development, financing, and ultimately construction. And I think Greg is a very solid individual, mature, good decision-making capacity, a great sort of team builder, consensus builder. Very happy to have him as the chair. Holding that board together. As you know, my first opportunity reporting to a board. We've got some tremendous skill sets on the board through sustainability with Lisa Wade. Wendy Liu, of course, great financial capacity and experience. So she runs our audit committee extremely well. We have Barb Womersley, who's a long-time board member, who covers off a lot of sort of HR and people pieces. So we've got a good skill set on the board. I think there's the opportunity here to perhaps think about adding some more skills to the board. And certainly that's a conversation that we're going to have in the board over the next period to see where that takes us. I think that would be appropriate as we move into that sort of decision-making process. Solid board, very supportive of me, and I think we're only going to grow skills and build a stronger board. In terms of the team, again, I'm on record as saying I was really the internal technical role, sort of non-exploration, if you like, and we've got very good exploration people led by Pete Chavasteri, our VPX. But in terms of sort of technical mine building, I was the sort of the sole role here. Obviously, I can't do that as CEO, so I am out right now having conversations, looking for sort of 3 technical project roles to really take the lead on the feasibility. And we're in that process. As we're successful in landing candidates and putting that team together, we will obviously come to the market and release that in due course. But yes, we need to put together a high-powered, competent, small technical team to get this done. And there are fantastic candidates out there in the market, and I'm confident we can do that.
Jon, that's great. And certainly I know you guys have been working hard at that. And of course, this is just the start of some of those appointments. And given your background and everybody else's background at the company, you guys have quite a depth of contacts and network out there in the sector from both development and operational finance. And then also I'll publicly thank Cal as well. Great guy. Cal's just fantastic to work with, and it's always been a pleasure. And I'm sure we'll keep in touch with him going forward here as well. Just staying on administrative, over to any updates on the proposed spinout transaction of the Goldstrike project. I would, of course, talk to you about that project, but given it's being spun out, we'll leave it to the new company to talk about. But the Goldstrike spinout, as well as the Antimony Ridge project into what is proposed as a specialty American metals.
The reality is it's more of the same. We announced that spin out earlier in the year in Q1. We are working through the implications of that in terms of the financing piece and the legal piece. We've indicated that we need to come to shareholders for a vote. We're working through that at the moment. And we've also mentioned that we've been looking at some M&A opportunities that we think would sort of bolster, add core weight to Spinout. We're still evaluating some opportunities. We're sort of in the process of trying to figure out relative timing of what would logically come first and how do we do that. So no specific news update I can talk to you about now, but the process is ongoing. I think it's an interesting opportunity. We do see the value of a critical metals vehicle. And as I said, we're in that process, and we will come back to shareholders when we have something material to tell them.
Jon, thank you for that. And I'll refer the audience back to the news release on April the 13th of this year, 2025, where Liberty Gold talks about that and what the anticipation is there and the potential of that spin out. And I want to get your comments on the market. Of course, Jon, I think this is always important to get from our guests. Any comments out there just with respect to broadly the gold market, and then of course sentiment out there for U.S. focused junior gold developers, which has I think turned and is on the upside, but just thoughts specifically on U.S. focused gold developers as well as just the gold market in general.
As everyone knows, developers have been unloved for years. It's been a sort of fun to hate developers. No one believes you. No one thinks you can do what you say you can do in the time you can do it with the money you can do it. And to be honest with you, the industry doesn't have a fantastic record of actually doing that. Hats off to our colleagues at G Mining. They're one of very few that have been very successful in sort of delivering on schedule and budget. And so hats off to them for doing that. And they've clearly been rewarded by that. With the sort of dislocation of gold equities from the gold market, the developers, I think, got hit the most with that dislocation. The strategy here is just wait. Why put my money into a developer? I'm just going to wait. That sentiment, as I alluded to in the previous answer, I think I'm starting to see the sort of realization that, hey, it's gone too far, if you like, in the developer space. There's a compelling value proposition here for those who've perhaps got a bit stickier money or a bit longer term view. If you want, Andrew, you mentioned it earlier, and I'm gonna sort of I'm going to pull you up on this. You said the boring engineering. You're absolutely right. I think a lot of people think that. I see that as the industry hasn't told the story very well. I think most people don't really know what it takes to build a mine because we haven't really told the story. See, people have some idea of how do you permit a mine, but I think, again, not terribly well. And Susie and I are working through, and we brought in a consultant here, to figure out how do we craft a narrative, particularly focused on black pine, but actually in the broader sense about what does it actually take to go through from an engineering sense, from a geology sense, from a people sense, and actually build an enterprise that ends up producing metal at the end of the day. So I think that's a story that's untold, and that we're going to look at how do we tell that in a way that's accessible to people. And it moves out of boring to, oh, okay, and ideally into, wow, that's interesting. I think, we've seen, if you think reality TV over the last 10 years, we've seen what historically was sort of mundane and not terribly interesting become fascinating by way of showing people what's involved. And I think there's a great opportunity for us in the market. So that was a bit of a long answer to the fact that I think the developer story is emerging. It's becoming recognized. We need to tell the story about, risk profile of a given developer because they are quite different. And it's generally, again, back to my previous comment, it's generally around timing, not necessarily about if, but rather more when. And I think we need to involve people in the process. Those milestones of I've got engineering. What does that mean? I've got my heat design. What does that mean? I think the world is turning, and developers are going to have their day, or at least a better day than they've had in the last 5 years going forward. So I'm optimistic in that space. In terms of the gold market, obviously I'm a long-term gold bull. It would be, Cal Everett clearly would be a better guy than I in many ways to opine about the gold market. But the truth is that nobody really knows. I think you've seen a huge run up in gold as a safe haven opportunity. Clearly, when risk is on, gold is a major opportunity. As we see escalating debt around the world, we see sort of crypto being an interesting investment opportunity, but you can't touch it, you can't feel it, you can't see it. And that sort of allure and the sort of permanence of gold, I think, only gets more important in today's world rather than less. So I'm hugely optimistic about the gold price. I'm not going to predict where it's going to go in any particular period, but I think it's got move to run positively from here, very definitely. And I see reasonably limited downside on gold.
Definitely the gold price will be the gold price for sure. And if you just encourage the audience to go back, just take a look at the upside case that was proposed when the pre-feasibility study came out. Look at where the gold price is now. Even if you do get the downside, which is quite a margin, down to the upside case there in the pre-feasibility study, that's an interesting case. And then just look at it even lower than that and still consider the valuation proposal here. Of
Yeah.
course, there's deliverables yet that Jon and the company needs to deliver upon, but it's quite interesting. So I'd encourage the audience to take a look at that. There's lots of reasons why gold is where it is today and why it can go higher, and some events yet to come that probably will drive it higher, and some of the things that you mentioned. And I would just highlight the complete fiscal irresponsibility out there across the board in most places and how that's being
Yeah.
mismanaged. But aside from that, certainly agree with you on a lot of those key drivers, and the fact that those developers, that tier of companies out there will have their day in the sun. Right now, the majors and the mid tiers are having a fairly decent day in the sun, and that'll continue to trickle down as we move on here. So, Jon, really appreciate the comments on that. And
Andrew, just one sort of statistic to reiterate to your listeners. I mean, assets like Black Pine, as you rightly mentioned, show this huge leverage to gold, right? The gold price, they really shine at an escalating gold price. And the reason for that is because they've got these very flat grade tonnage curves. So they've got a lot of material sitting in that lower grade end. And as you see a metal price rise, material that was waste rock that you would put on a waste dump, becomes ore, and you can then treat it and get revenue from it. And that economic impact of those large tons for a relatively small change in the gold price has a profound effect on the overall economics of these projects. And that's why they're so interesting in a rising gold environment. And just to sort of give you some numbers on that, for every $100 change, positive change in the gold price, the Black Pine NPV goes up by $100 million. So that's our market cap for a $100 change in the gold price today. That's an astonishing number in terms of leverage, upside leverage for these deposits.
definitely puts it in perspective. And even if you look at some comparables out there, of course, encourage the audience to do that as part of their own work, is look at some of the comparables to what Liberty Gold has here. Well, short of anything else you want to add, Jon, why don't we wrap it up for now? Really appreciate you coming on. For potential investors who are listening, and the company has a market capitalization of about 145 million Canadian dollars. Why should Liberty Gold be considered within the institutional, family office, and retail investors' portfolio at this stage?
I think we have a tiger by the tail here, in fact, more than by the tail. This is a very large plus 5 million ounce oxide gold system in the US in a safe jurisdiction with known and understood permitting processes, with an administration that is very pro mining, that is setting the context for get it done in the US. The project itself, from a capital point of view, is very doable with a company of our size and capacity. It is technically very straightforward. Open pit, run of mine, heap leaching is about as technically simple as it gets in the business. It is a low environmental footprint because we're restarting an old brownfields project. So we don't have any of the sort of new site, undisturbed land, undisturbed viewshed issues that many have. We don't have the environmental problems. So this is eminently permittable. It's eminently financeable. We are building the team sensibly and progressively that can deliver on this in the time frame that we say. So, from a permitting point of view, this is the next milestone is imminent. I think getting a permit is inevitable. We will get a permit for this. The only issue for me is when, and I think we largely answer that question with the NOI in hand. I'm here having built two mines in my career, one in Argentina and one in Chile. I'm here to put the team together to lead this company to build it. And I thank the shareholders out there who've been with us for a while for their support. I look forward to re-engaging with them periodically over the next 2.5 years as we move through this process. And I look forward to the first gold pour sometime in 2028.
Jon, and for further information, how can interested parties contact the company?
So we have, obviously, we have a website, libertygold.ca. Encourage people to go on there. They'll be able to download a copy of the technical report, the pre-feasibility study on Black Pine. And also there, they'll find a link to info@libertygold.ca, which is how they can contact Susie Bell, who is our manager of IR. I am available to talk to shareholders at the flick of an email. I enjoy engaging with shareholders. It's a new experience for me, and I always get some challenging and interesting questions from different people. So I encourage shareholders to reach out and have a chat.
Jon, thank you for that, and thank you for the update on the company. Keep up the efforts at Black Pine, and we're looking forward to hearing from you more on updates later on in the year.
Fantastic, Andrew. Really, really good to catch up with you, mate. Appreciate your support, and we'll catch up in sort of 3 to 4 months.